"Don't you touch airline property." The words cut through the hushed atmosphere of the first-class cabin, followed by the sharp, ugly sound of skin hitting skin. The sterile environment of a first-class cabin on flight UA 482 from San Francisco to New York was meant to be a sanctuary of privilege and peace. But that sanctuary had just been shattered by the unmistakable sound of a slap. It wasn't a passenger dispute. It was an assault by a uniformed flight attendant on a black woman who had made a simple request. That flight attendant, smug in her perceived authority, had no idea she hadn't just assaulted a passenger. She had assaulted the very foundation of her career, the silent partner in her paycheck, the architect of a corporate reckoning that would burn her world to the ground. The hum of the Boeing 777 was a familiar lullaby to Dr. Alexandria Rhodes. It was the sound of transition, of moving between the two poles of her life, the relentless, data-driven world of her financial empire in New York and the quiet intellectual haven of her research institute near Palo Alto. Today, she was flying east back to the steel and glass canyons of Manhattan. Anyone looking at her would have seen nothing remarkable. She wore a simple charcoal gray cashmere hoodie, faded black jeans that had molded to her form over years of comfortable wear, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant but simple braided bun, and her face, devoid of makeup, was serene. In her lap rested a battered leather satchel containing a laptop and a collection of academic papers on macroeconomic theory. This leather satchel had been a gift from her father just before he died of a sudden heart attack when she was 8. He had used it through his own doctoral studies in economics at Howard University, a legacy she had honored by following his academic path. She'd carried it through Harvard, through Wall Street, and now through the corridors of power she herself had built. It was worn not from neglect, but from constant companionship. She was the picture of an off-duty academic, not the formidable head of Obsidian Capital Partners, a private equity firm so influential it could make or break Fortune 500 companies with a single press release. Anonymity for Alexandria was the ultimate luxury and also her most effective weapon. She had learned long ago that being underestimated provided a tactical advantage unlike any other. She settled into seat 2A, a window seat in the sprawling first-class cabin. She nodded politely to the man in 2B, a young tech entrepreneur already barking into his phone about seed rounds and user acquisition. Alexandria simply wanted to work. The flight was a 5-hour window of uninterrupted focus, a precious commodity. The cabin air smelled of leather and expensive perfume, undercut by the antiseptic tang that all planes seem to carry regardless of class. The low hum of the engines formed a white noise backdrop that Alexandria found soothing. Outside, ground crew scurried across the tarmac under the peach glow of a California sunset. The flight attendants began their pre-flight dance. One, a young man with a kind smile, offered her a pre-departure drink. She asked for water, no ice. He brought it promptly, his manner professional and courteous. "Thank you, David," she said, noting his name tag. He smiled with genuine warmth before moving on. Then came the other flight attendant assigned to her aisle. Her name tag read Heather. She was a woman in her late 40s with blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin around her eyes. She had the weary, practiced smile of someone who had been in customer service for 2 decades and had long since lost any genuine warmth. She moved with an air of brisk, almost resentful efficiency. Dark circles shadowed her eyes not just from fatigue, but from something harder, a bitterness that had calcified over years. She saw Alexandria's casual attire, and her relaxed posture and an immediate, almost imperceptible judgment flickered in her eyes. It was a look Alexandria had seen 1,000 times before. The look that assessed, categorized, and dismissed her in a single glance. "Ma'am, I'll need to take your satchel and put it in the overhead compartment for takeoff," Heather said. Her voice clipped. "Of course," Alexandria replied, smiling faintly. I just need to get my laptop out first. I'd like to get some work done once we're in the air. Heather waited, tapping her foot impatiently as Alexandria retrieved her sleek carbon fiber laptop and a small power adapter. She placed the satchel on the floor for Heather to stow. Heather picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it were a soiled object, and shoved it into the bin above with unnecessary force. Alexandria chose to ignore it. Microaggressions were the static of her life. She had learned long ago to tune them out lest they drive her mad. But as Heather stowed the bag, Alexandria caught a glimpse of the woman's reflection in the window. There was a flicker, just the briefest moment of uncertainty in Heather's eyes, as if some part of her recognized her behavior was unprofessional. But then her jaw set, and the moment passed. Alexandria filed that away. Even those most committed to their prejudices sometimes felt the tug of doubt. After takeoff, as the plane leveled out at 35,000 feet, Alexandria decided to plug in her laptop to preserve its battery. The outlet located on the front of the console between the seats was notoriously finicky. She tried to insert the adapter, but the angle was awkward. She didn't want to force it and risk breaking it or the socket. She was a person who respected equipment, whether it was a multi-billion-dollar corporate asset or a simple electrical outlet. She waited for Heather to pass by on her next round. "Excuse me," Alexandria said politely. "I'm having a little trouble with this power outlet. Could you perhaps take a look? Maybe there's a trick to it." Heather stopped sighing as if Alexandria had asked her to solve a complex engineering problem. "You just push it in," she said, not even looking down. "I tried that." Alexandria said, her voice still even. "It seems to be stuck, and I don't want to damage it." "Would you mind?" Heather's eyes narrowed. In her mind, this wasn't a request for help. It was a challenge. This casually dressed woman was to her incapable of performing a simple task and was now wasting her valuable time. Her prejudice, simmering just below the surface, began to bubble up. For just a moment, Alexandria saw something personal flash across Heather's face, a memory perhaps of her own frustrations. The woman had likely started her career with optimism, only to find herself 20 years in still serving passengers who often treated her as invisible. That didn't excuse what was about to happen, but it contextualized it. "Ma'am, it's a simple plug," Heather said condescendingly, her voice loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "It's not that difficult. Just give it a good shove." Alexandria's pleasant expression didn't change, but a cool firmness entered her voice. "I am telling you that it is not working with a normal amount of force. I am asking for your assistance. That is part of your job, is it not?" The challenge was now overt. The tech entrepreneur in 2B paused his typing, sensing the shift in tone. An older woman across the aisle looked over with concern. Heather's face flushed a blotchy red. Humiliated and furious at being called out, her professionalism evaporated, replaced by raw, unvarnished hostility. "Our job is safety, not plugging in your electronics for you," she snapped. Alexandria, still calm, decided to try one last time herself. She leaned forward, using her thumb and forefinger to gently jiggle the adapter into the socket. She wasn't shoving it, she was maneuvering it. And that's when it happened. Heather saw Alexandria's hand on the console, and something inside her snapped. She reached down, and with a swift, violent motion, slapped Alexandria's hand away. "Don't you touch airline property!" Heather hissed, her face contorted with rage. Time seemed to freeze. The hum of the engines was the only sound. The tech entrepreneur's jaw was literally hanging open. The woman across the aisle gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Alexandria slowly, deliberately pulled her hand back and cradled it in her other palm. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry out. She lifted her gaze from her hand and met Heather's furious eyes with an unnerving glacial calm that was far more terrifying than any scream. "I believe," Alexandria said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You just put your hands on me. You just assaulted a passenger." Heather seemed to realize the gravity of her action, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. For a split second, her eyes widened in alarm, an instinctive recognition of the line she had crossed, but then the defensive armor snapped back into place. "You were being non-compliant and attempting to damage the equipment," she blustered, trying to frame her assault as a procedural necessity. "I was attempting to plug in my computer." "Alexandria," corrected her, her voice cutting through Heather's defense like a surgeon's scalpel. "And you responded by physically striking me. I want your name, your employee number, and I want you to inform the captain immediately that a member of his crew has assaulted a passenger in first class." The formality and precision of her demand rattled Heather. This wasn't the hysterical reaction she might have expected. This was something else entirely. This was controlled, focused, and utterly self-possessed. For the first time, a sliver of fear pierced Heather's righteous anger. She had made a terrible, terrible mistake. She just had no idea how terrible it was. The aftermath of the slap hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Heather Morgan stood frozen, her own hand tingling from the impact, her mind racing to build a fortress of justifications around her indefensible action. The passenger was difficult. She was aggressive. She was trying to break the seat. But even as the lies formed, the cold, unwavering stare from Alexandria Rhodes began to dismantle them. "Your name, Alexandria," repeated her voice, no louder, yet somehow more resonant. "And your employee number. Now." The tech entrepreneur in seat 2B, a man named James Winters, finally found his voice. "Whoa, I saw the whole thing. You completely slapped her hand. She wasn't doing anything wrong." He was already pulling out his phone, his thumb hovering over the video record button, a reflex of his generation when confronted with injustice. Heather shot him a venomous glare before turning her attention back to Alexandria. The fortress was crumbling fast. "My name is on my badge," she mumbled, gesturing vaguely at her chest. "I want you to state it for the record," Alexandria insisted, "and your employee ID number." The head purser, a man named David, had noticed the commotion from the galley and was now hurrying down the aisle. He was a veteran of the skies, his face a roadmap of long hauls and de-escalated conflicts. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his eyes darting between Heather's flushed face and Alexandria's stony composure. "Yes, David, there is Alexandria," said, reading his name tag. "Your colleague Heather has just physically assaulted me. She slapped my hand away when I was attempting to use the power outlet." David's professional smile faltered. "Assaulted Heather? What is she talking about?" "She was going to break the socket," Heather exclaimed, her voice rising in panic. I just tapped her hand to get her to stop." She was being an unruly passenger. A tap. James from 2B scoffed. "Lady, I heard that slap from over here. Don't even try to lie." David looked at Heather, then at Alexandria, then at the other passengers who were now openly staring, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. He knew this was serious. The word assault on an aircraft was radioactive. "Ma'am," David said, turning to Alexandria, his voice now a low, placating murmur. "I am so sorry for this misunderstanding. Perhaps we can—" "There is no misunderstanding," Alexandria interrupted her tone, leaving no room for negotiation. An employee of this airline laid her hands on me in an aggressive manner. "It is not a misunderstanding. It is an event that requires a formal report. I have requested her name and employee number, and I have asked that the captain be notified. Have my requests been understood?" David swallowed hard. He was dealing with someone who knew the language of liability. "Yes, ma'am. Of course." He turned to Heather. "Heather, go to the galley now." Heather, finally looking truly frightened, shot one last hateful look at Alexandria before scurrying away. David knelt beside Alexandria's seat. "Ma'am, on behalf of the entire crew, I am profoundly sorry. This is completely unacceptable behavior. I will inform Captain Reynolds immediately. Can I get you anything? another drink, a meal. I want a pen and several sheets of paper, Alexandria said. And I would like the full name of the gentleman in seat 2B who has offered to be a witness. I will be writing a formal statement, and I expect the captain to take possession of it before we land. Of course, David said, rushing to comply. For the next hour, Alexandria wrote her handwriting as precise and controlled as her voice. She detailed the time, the location, the sequence of events, the words exchanged, and the nature of the physical contact. She described Heather's clear and unprovoked aggression. She did not use emotional language. She wrote it like a legal deposition, a recitation of facts, cold, hard, and irrefutable. Inside, though, Alexandria felt the familiar weight of these encounters, the exhaustion of once again having to be perfect, controlled, and composed in the face of disrespect. As a child, she had learned to swallow these affronts. As an adult, she had learned to transform them into fuel for change. James in 2B provided his full name, James Winters, and his business email address. The older woman across the aisle, a Mrs. Gable, also volunteered her information, telling David in a hushed but firm tone that the flight attendant's behavior was an absolute disgrace. Captain Reynolds, a gray-haired, authoritative man, soon emerged from the cockpit. He came directly to Alexandria's seat and knelt just as David had. This was a sign of respect and seriousness that Alexandria noted. Dr. Rhodes, he began, having clearly been given her name. He didn't know the doctor was for a Ph.D. in economics. He was just using the title on the passenger manifest. I am Captain Reynolds. I have been fully briefed by my purser, and I have confined Ms. Morgan to the galley for the remainder of the flight. She will not be interacting with any more passengers. I have read your statement. It is detailed and alarming. It is factual, Alexandria stated. I have no reason to doubt that the captain said sincerely, and I want to extend my personal apology. In my 30 years of flying, I have never had a report like this about a member of my crew. This incident will be escalated to the highest levels of our corporate security and HR departments the moment we land. I will personally hand-deliver your statement. Thank you, Captain Alexandria said. That is all I ask for at this time. She didn't demand compensation. She didn't threaten lawsuits. She simply stated her expectation that the system, the airline's own process for accountability, would be followed to the letter. This, in a way, was more unsettling for the crew than a screaming tirade. It implied a faith in process and a deep-seated knowledge of how such processes were supposed to work. For the rest of the flight, Alexandria was treated with a reverence usually reserved for visiting royalty. David personally attended to her every need, which was simply to be left alone. She opened her laptop, which she had successfully plugged in herself after the captain insisted on ensuring the outlet was functional, and began to work. She compartmentalized the incident. The emotional response could wait. Now was the time for action. She composed a short encrypted email on her laptop. The recipient was Nathan Rivera, the chief counsel of Obsidian Capital Partners, and her most trusted advisor for over a decade. The subject line was simple: Incident on UA 482. The body of the email was just as succinct. Nathan I was the subject of an unprovoked physical assault by a flight attendant, Heather Morgan, on my flight to JFK today. The crew and captain are aware and have filed a report. I have 2 witnesses. Initiate a passive background inquiry on United Airlines corporate structure. I want to know the current composition of the board, the name of their head of in-flight services, and the primary point of contact for their corporate legal department. Do not make any official contact yet. I want to see how their internal process handles this first. Let's see if they police their own. Alexandria. She hit send. The email shot through the aircraft's Wi-Fi, a digital arrow aimed at the heart of a corporate behemoth that had until now been completely unaware of her existence. As the plane began its descent into the sprawling metropolis of New York, Alexandria looked out the window. She wasn't looking at the city. She was looking at the future. A future where Heather Morgan and her employer would learn a very hard lesson about who they were dealing with. The storm was coming. The moment Alexandria deplaned at JFK, the airline's carefully constructed veneer of concern began to crack. A ground manager, a harried-looking man named Frank Wilson, was waiting for her at the jet bridge holding a tablet with her name on it. "Dr. Rhodes?" he asked, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Frank Wilson, duty manager. Captain Reynolds asked me to meet you. On behalf of United Airlines, I'd like to again apologize for the unpleasantness on your flight." "It was not unpleasantness, Mr. Wilson. It was an assault," Alexandria corrected him, her voice tired but firm. "Yes, of course. The incident," Frank fumbled. "We've already credited your frequent flyer account with 50,000 bonus miles as a gesture of our apology for the lapse in service." Alexandria stopped walking and turned to face him fully. The bustling chaos of the terminal seemed to fade away. "Miles, you think this is about a lapse in service? You think a physical confrontation initiated by your staff can be smoothed over with a travel voucher?" Frank's face paled. He was a middle manager equipped to handle complaints about lost luggage or delayed flights, not accusations of criminal assault. He was following a script from a corporate playbook that was woefully inadequate for this situation. "Well, it's our standard procedure for customer dissatisfaction," he stammered. "Then your standard procedure is an insult," Alexandria said, her voice dropping to a low, intense register. "I am not a dissatisfied customer. I am the victim of a battery. I expect a formal written communication from your corporate office, specifically from your head of in-flight services and your legal department within 48 business hours. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Frank squeaked, looking utterly terrified. Alexandria simply nodded and walked away, leaving him standing dumbfounded at the gate. She didn't look back. Her car was waiting. Within an hour, she was back in the granite and steel cocoon of her office on the 80th floor of One World Trade Center. The skyline of her kingdom spread out before her. As she stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, Alexandria's mind drifted to her childhood in Detroit. The cramped apartment she shared with her mother, a hospital administrator who worked double shifts to keep them afloat after Alexandria's father died when she was just 8. She remembered the first time she'd experienced the sting of discrimination. She was 12, browsing in an upscale bookstore, admiring a beautiful leather-bound collection of economic essays. The store manager had followed her, then asked her loudly if she was looking for the children's section instead. Her mother had taught her then through gritted teeth on the car ride home. "They don't get to see you cry. They don't get to know they hurt you. You keep your dignity, always." She touched the worn leather of her father's satchel, now sitting on her desk. He had been her first hero, the brilliant economist whose theories on market corrections had been largely ignored until after his death. Sometimes he'd told her once, "The world isn't ready for what you have to offer. That doesn't mean you stop offering it." That lesson had served her well at the prestigious boarding school, where she'd earned a full academic scholarship, and later at Harvard, where she'd completed both her undergraduate degree and her PhD in economics. While her classmates navigated the world with easy confidence, Alexandria had learned to move through it with calculated precision. On Wall Street, as a junior analyst at Goldman Sachs, she'd endured the subtle and not-so-subtle biases. The assumption that she was a diversity hire. The surprise when she spoke knowledgeably about market trends. The way senior partners would repeat her ideas but attribute them to white male colleagues. It was during those years that Alexandria had conceived of Obsidian Capital, not just as an investment firm but as an instrument of change, a way to acquire the kind of power that couldn't be dismissed or overlooked, the kind of power that could reshape institutions from within. She'd named it Obsidian after the volcanic glass her father had kept on his desk, black sharp, formed under intense pressure, and capable of cutting with microscopic precision. Like a good economic theory, he'd told her, It reveals the truth by making the cleanest possible cut. In the 15 years since founding Obsidian, she had built it into one of the most respected and feared players in private equity. Her reputation for identifying undervalued companies with potential for dramatic growth was unmatched. But what few knew was her particular interest in companies with problematic corporate cultures. Alexandria didn't just want to make money. She wanted to transform. And now United Airlines had placed itself squarely in her sights. As she turned from the window back to her desk, Alexandria's phone buzzed. It was Nathan Rivera. "I got your email," he said without preamble. "Are you all right?" Alexandria smiled faintly. This was why Nathan had been her closest ally for 15 years. Unlike most lawyers, his first concern was for her, not the potential case. They had met during her final year at Harvard when she was defending her doctoral thesis, and he was finishing law school. He'd approached her after her presentation on economic leverage as a tool for corporate reform. "You're not just theorizing," he'd said. "You're planning a revolution." He'd been by her side ever since her legal counsel, her strategic partner, and the one person who understood exactly what she was trying to build. "I'm fine," she said, the steel in her voice belying the lingering sting on her hand where Heather had struck her. "What have you found? I've initiated the background search. Preliminary information shows United's parent company is headed by CEO Thomas Bennett, a veteran of the airline industry known for his cost-cutting measures and focus on shareholder value. And in-flight services. That would be Andrea Collins. She's been with the company for about 5 years, came from Delta. The general counsel is William Parker, former partner at Holden and Marsh. Any connections to Obsidian Alexandria asked. None that are obvious. They don't know who you are, Alexandria. To them, you were just another passenger." Alexandria sat down in her ergonomic chair, her fingers steepled against her lips. "Good. I want to see how they handle this when they think I'm powerless. Let's give them the 48 hours I requested. If they respond appropriately, we'll leave it at that. If not..." Nathan knew that tone. It was the same one she'd used before Obsidian had acquired a controlling interest in a tech company whose CEO had been quietly burying sexual harassment complaints. "If not, we move to phase 2, he finished for her. "Exactly," Alexandria said. "In the meantime, map out their corporate structure. I want to know board composition, major shareholders, debt structure, everything." "Already on it." Nathan paused. "Alex," he said, using a nickname only he was permitted to use. "Are you sure you're okay? This wasn't just a professional slight. She put her hands on you." Alexandria's composure flickered just for a moment. "I've experienced worse, Nathan. You know that." "I do. That doesn't make it acceptable." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. And that's precisely why we're going to ensure it has consequences. Not just for Heather Morgan, but for the system that made her believe her behavior was justified and protected." As she hung up, Alexandria looked at her hand. The red mark from Heather's slap was fading, but the memory of the humiliation, the dismissal, the sheer arrogance of it all that burned bright. Obsidian Capital had not become a powerhouse by acting rashly. Alexandria Rhodes did not make emotional decisions. She would give United Airlines the opportunity to do the right thing. And if they failed that test, as she suspected they might, she would show them exactly what it meant to face consequences. The next 2 days were a masterclass in corporate deflection. The promised 48 hours came and went. There was no communication from the legal department, no call from the head of in-flight services. On the 3rd day, a generic email arrived. It was from customercare@united.com. Subject: regarding your recent travel experience. Dear valued customer, thank you for reaching out to United Airlines. We are in receipt of your complaint regarding your flight UA482 from SFO to JFK. We take all feedback seriously and have launched an internal review of the incident you described. At United Airlines, we are committed to providing a safe and comfortable environment for all our passengers. We are looking into the matter with the crew members involved to get a full picture of the events. We appreciate your patience as we conduct our review. As a token of our goodwill, we have already deposited 50,000 bonus miles into your Mileage Plus account. Sincerely, United Airlines Customer Care Team. Alexandria read the email twice. Valued customer. The anonymous, infuriatingly bland salutation was like a splash of cold water. They hadn't even used her name. They had reduced her assault to feedback and an incident described. This wasn't an investigation. It was a containment strategy. Then her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. She answered cautiously. Dr. Rhodes. This is Linda Martinez from Channel 7 News. We received an anonymous tip about an incident on a United flight involving a passenger being assaulted by a flight attendant. Would you care to comment? Alexandria's eyes narrowed. This was an unexpected complication. Someone was trying to take control of the narrative. I'm afraid I have no comment at this time, she said smoothly, then hung up. Within minutes, Nathan was on the line. Alexandria, we have a problem. There's a story brewing. Someone likely from United is trying to get ahead of this by spinning it to the media. They're suggesting an altercation between a difficult passenger and a crew member. How do you know this? I have contacts at several outlets. They've all received similar tips. The language is consistent, clearly coming from a single source. They're trying to muddy the waters before we can take action. Alexandria considered this. It was a clumsy attempt at damage control, but it confirmed what she already suspected: United Airlines wasn't investigating in good faith. They were circling the wagons. Do we have the information I requested on their corporate structure? She asked. Yes, and something interesting. Their stock ownership is more fragmented than usual for a company this size. No single entity owns more than 8%. Except for a collection of holdings that, when traced back through various shells and investment vehicles, appear to be controlled by obsidian sub-funds. Exactly how much do we control, Nathan? Once you connect all the dots, 12.8% of outstanding shares. We're their largest shareholder, and they don't even know it. Alexandria smiled faintly. Years ago, her team had begun quietly accumulating positions in companies with poor service records and problematic management practices. United had been on that list. Their pattern of consumer complaints and employee grievances had made them a perfect candidate for what Alexandria called reform investments. Excellent, she said. Then it's time. She forwarded the dismissive email to Nathan with a single word: begin. Nathan, a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his early 50s, had already completed the passive inquiry. His team had mapped out the entire corporate hierarchy of United Airlines' parent company. They knew the CEO was Thomas Bennett, a titan of the industry known for his ruthless cost-cutting measures and his obsession with shareholder value. The head of in-flight services was Andrea Collins. The general counsel was William Parker. Nathan's first move was a gentle probing phone call. He didn't call the customer care hotline. He called the direct line of a junior attorney in William Parker's office, a contact he had from a previous unrelated corporate transaction. Mark Nathan Rivera here. He said, his tone friendly and relaxed. Say I have a bit of a strange one. A client of mine, a very high-profile individual, was on a flight a few days ago, UA 482. Had a rather nasty run-in with a flight attendant. Physical contact involved. She filed a report with the captain, but all she's received is a form letter from customer care. Seems a bit off, don't you think? The junior attorney, eager to seem helpful to a man of Nathan's stature, promised to look into it. An hour later, he called back, his voice now stilted and official. Nathan, I've looked at the file, he said. Our internal report indicates a disruptive passenger who was verbally abusive to the crew and was attempting to damage aircraft seating. The flight attendant acted to prevent this damage. It's being handled by HR as a standard crew performance review. Nathan's friendly demeanor didn't waver, but his mind was racing. A disruptive passenger. Verbally abusive. That's a fascinating interpretation of events, Mark. Did this report happen to include witness statements from other passengers? There was a pause. The report was based on the accounts of the crew members present, the attorney said carefully. I see. Nathan said, So Heather Morgan and her friends have circled the wagons and created a work of fiction, and the airline is accepting it at face value. Very enlightening. Thank you for your time, Mark. He hung up. The airline's strategy was now crystal clear. It was a classic she said they said. Except in this case, it was she said the institution said. They were going to protect their employee label Alexandria as the problem and bury the incident under layers of HR bureaucracy. Heather Morgan, feeling the full weight of the corporate machine behind her, would feel vindicated and untouchable. Nathan walked into Alexandria's office and laid out the situation. They've branded you an unruly passenger. They interviewed Heather and her colleagues who have all corroborated a story in which you were the aggressor. They are stonewalling. They believe you're just another disgruntled traveler they can ignore. Alexandria looked out the window for a long moment, watching the tiny helicopters buzz between skyscrapers. They believe I am powerless, she said softly. They've made an assessment based on incomplete data of fatal business error. She turned back to Nathan, a fire in her eyes that could melt steel. They've chosen their position. They've decided to back the word of a prejudiced employee over an assaulted passenger. They have endorsed Heather's actions as acceptable, so we are no longer dealing with a rogue employee. We are dealing with a corporate policy, a culture. What's the play? Nathan asked. The play is simple, Alexandria replied. We are going to introduce ourselves properly. She picked up a pen and a sheet of her personal embossed letterhead. Nathan, she said, get me the home address of every single member of the United Airlines Board of Directors, and find me the direct private office line for Thomas Bennett. Not his assistant, not his secretary. Him. Nathan smiled. The time for passive inquiry was over. The time for shock and awe had begun. The corporate wall of silence was about to be hit by a wrecking ball named Obsidian Capital Partners. For the next 24 hours, the 80th floor of One World Trade Center became the silent, humming nerve center of a corporate war. The atmosphere at Obsidian Capital Partners was one of serene, focused intensity. There were no raised voices, no panicked movements. There was only the quiet confidence of a team of experts executing a plan with surgical precision. When Dr. Alexandria Rhodes had uttered the single word, "Begin," Nathan Rivera had simply nodded. It was the signal he had been waiting for, the release of a coiled spring. While the executives at United Airlines went about their days attending meetings on quarterly earnings and approving marketing campaigns, a corporate earthquake was being meticulously engineered directly beneath them. They were utterly oblivious, confident that the unruly passenger incident was being quietly managed and buried by their well-oiled bureaucracy. They could not have been more wrong. Meanwhile, Alexandria's private life continued. She had dinner with a graduate student whose research she was funding, reviewed papers for an economic journal, and even attended a charity gala where she was photographed with the mayor. Nothing in her demeanor suggested she was simultaneously orchestrating one of the most precisely targeted corporate takeovers in recent memory. That evening, she and Nathan shared a late dinner in her office, a ritual they had maintained through 15 years of partnership. Thai food from their favorite hole-in-the-wall restaurant eaten at her conference table while they finalized strategy. You know, Nathan said, picking up a spring roll, I still remember the first time I saw this look in your eyes. That tech company in 2017? Alexandria smiled faintly. Roberts Technologies. The CEO had been burying sexual harassment complaints, and we found out his board knew about it. They all thought they were untouchable. They weren't. No. Nathan studied her face. This is different, though, isn't it? This is personal. Alexandria was quiet for a moment. All injustice is personal, Nathan. We just pretend it isn't so we can sleep at night. He nodded, understanding the deeper truth. In 15 years, he'd never seen Alexandria pursue a vendetta. She had never used Obsidian's power for petty revenge. but she had used it again and again to force change in companies that refused to evolve on their own. "The letters are ready," he said, "and the call to Bennett is scheduled for 9:01 tomorrow morning." "Perfect timing," Alexandria replied, "right in the middle of his fleet acquisition meeting." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "How did you know about that?" She smiled enigmatically. "I make it my business to know the schedules of CEOs we might need to influence." The pieces were in place. The storm was about to break. The first phase of the operation was the preparation of the communicates. This was not a task delegated to a mailroom. Nathan oversaw it personally in a glass-walled conference room. A junior analyst brought in a box of Alexandria's personal stationery. It was heavy, cream-colored vellum, with her understated personal crest a simple obsidian flame embossed at the top. The choice was deliberate. This wasn't a corporate letterhead from Obsidian Capital. This was a message from the woman herself, a direct and personal accounting. Nathan reviewed the addresses his team had compiled. They hadn't just found the primary residences of the 12 members of the United Airlines Board of Directors. They had cross-referenced them with property records and recent social media check-ins to ensure they were current. The packages wouldn't go to an office assistant or a P.O. box. They would arrive on the marble steps of their sprawling estates in Greenwich, Connecticut, be handed by a doorman to their high-rise penthouses overlooking Miami's Biscayne Bay, and be left at the door of their quiet homes in the affluent Chicago suburb of Lake Forest. Receiving a corporate matter at home was an intentional breach of protocol, a clear signal that the protective barrier between their professional and personal lives had just been vaporized. Inside each FedEx Priority overnight envelope chosen for its psychological impact of absolute urgency was the single heavy vellum sheet. The letter was a masterpiece of controlled fury. Dear Board Member, my name is Dr. Alexandria Rhodes. On August 10, 2025, I was a passenger in Seat 2A on your flight UA482 from San Francisco to New York. During that flight, I was the victim of an unprovoked physical assault by one of your employees, Flight Attendant Heather Morgan. I followed your company's protocol with the expectation of a professional resolution. I filed a detailed written report with the captain. I provided the names of 2 independent witnesses who corroborated my account. In return for my adherence to your process, I received a generic email from customer care that did not even use my name. Worse, my character was defamed in an internal report that labeled me as unruly and disruptive, a clear and actionable fabrication created by the perpetrator and her colleagues to shield themselves from accountability. Your executive team, under the leadership of Mr. Thomas Bennett, has chosen to endorse this fabrication through their deliberate inaction and contemptuously dismissive response. By doing so, they have fostered and protected a culture where an employee can physically assault a passenger with impunity. Perhaps this is because they, like Ms. Morgan, made an assessment of me based on my appearance. They assumed I was a person of no consequence whose complaint could be safely ignored and buried. This was a grave miscalculation. I am not just a passenger. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Obsidian Capital Partners. As of the close of business yesterday, Friday, August 15th, through our various managed funds and holding companies, Obsidian Capital controls 12.8% of the outstanding common stock of your parent company, United Airlines Holdings, Inc. This makes us your single largest institutional shareholder. Therefore, this is no longer a customer service complaint. This is now a formal notice to the board of a catastrophic failure in corporate governance, ethical conduct, and fundamental risk management under the current leadership. An airline that cannot guarantee the basic physical safety of its passengers from its own staff has a terminal illness in its culture. An executive team that attempts to cover up such an incident rather than address it is not fit to lead. I have instructed my counsel to prepare for all eventualities. I await a response from Mr. Bennett that reflects a true understanding of the gravity of this situation. I trust that you, as a board member with fiduciary duties to all shareholders, including and especially the one who was assaulted on your aircraft, will ensure he finds that understanding swiftly. Sincerely, Dr. Alexandria Rhodes. The packages were dispatched. The clock started ticking. The next morning at 9:01 a.m. Central Time, the private line in Thomas Bennett's cavernous office atop the Willis Tower chirped a sound distinct from his regular business lines. Bennett, a man whose silver hair and perfectly tailored suits radiated an aura of unassailable power, was in the middle of a high-stakes conference call about a multi-billion-dollar fleet acquisition from Airbus. His personal secretary, a woman who had worked for him for 15 years and knew his moods intimately, hesitated at the door before entering. Her face was pale. "Mr. Bennett, I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But a Mr. Nathan Rivera is on your private line. He said to tell you it's regarding Dr. Alexandria Rhodes." Bennett scowled, annoyed at the interruption. The name meant nothing to him. It was probably some wealthy donor or disgruntled VIP. "I'm in a meeting. Tell him I'm busy. Have him call William in legal." "Sir," his secretary persisted, taking a nervous step closer. He insisted. He said if you didn't take the call, his next call would be to the Wall Street Journal. The sheer, unmitigated gall of the threat was so audacious that it silenced the room. The executives on the call with Bennett looked at each other confused. A threat of that magnitude was not something you ignored. Annoyance gave way to a flicker of cautious intrigue. Bennett held up a hand to his team, signaling for quiet, and picked up the receiver to his private line. "This is Thomas Bennett," he said. His voice clipped and impatient. Mr. Bennett came the calm, impossibly confident voice of Nathan Rivera. "Thank you for taking my call. I am the Chief Counsel for Obsidian Capital Partners. I'm calling on behalf of our CEO, Dr. Alexandria Rhodes. I trust that name is now familiar to you." Just as Nathan spoke, Bennett's personal cell phone, lying face up on his desk, buzzed. It was a text from Lawrence Gable, his lead board director. The text contained a single shaky photo of the letter. Bennett's eyes scanned the first few lines. "Physical assault. Flight UA-482. Dr. Alexandria Rhodes." His blood ran cold. The name on the phone, the name on the letter, they matched. He stared at the text, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the phone. He looked back at the receiver as if it were a venomous snake. "Obsidian Capital." Bennett breathed, his voice suddenly a strangled whisper. The very same, Nathan said smoothly, his voice a chilling counterpoint to Bennett's dawning horror. "The firm that, as you're likely just discovering, is your largest shareholder. The firm whose founder and CEO, your flight attendant, Ms. Heather Morgan, assaulted last week." The silence on the line was profound. In that single moment, Thomas Bennett's world, a world of predictable challenges and manageable crises, tilted violently on its axis. This wasn't a disgruntled passenger with a lawyer. This wasn't a frivolous lawsuit he could swat away with a small army of corporate attorneys. This was a tactical nuclear strike on his company, his board, and his career, launched by one of the most feared and respected players on Wall Street. The unruly passenger from the internal report, the woman they had dismissed with a form letter and bonus miles, was the person who effectively owned a controlling interest in his paycheck. "My God," Bennett finally choked out. "God has very little to do with this, Mr. Bennett." Nathan replied, his voice hardening, losing its pleasant veneer and becoming as sharp as chipping ice. "This is about a failure of management, a failure of culture, and a failure of basic human decency. Dr. Rhodes was willing to trust your internal process. She gave you the opportunity to handle this with integrity. Your company failed that test in every conceivable way. You and your team have turned a manageable HR issue into an existential threat to your leadership." Bennett, a man used to shouting, commanding, and dominating every conversation, was utterly speechless. He was drowning, and Nathan Rivera wasn't even in the room. What does she want? Bennett finally managed to ask the question, sounding pathetic even to his own ears. What she wants, Mr. Bennett, is for the company she has invested billions of dollars in to not employ people who physically assault its customers, Nathan retorted. What she wants is a leadership team that takes such an event with the seriousness it deserves. What she demands. Well, you will be hearing about her demands very shortly. She is no longer interested in speaking with you or anyone on your team directly. All communication will now go through me. Nathan paused, letting the weight of his words settle before delivering the final blow. I suggest you convene an emergency board meeting. In fact, I know for a fact that at least 4 of your board members are trying to call your cell phone right now. You have presided over a staggering display of corporate negligence. Your next actions will determine whether you can salvage this situation or whether Dr. Rhodes instructs us to begin the formal process of identifying and installing a new CEO. Without waiting for a reply, Nathan hung up the phone. In the silent, opulent Chicago office, Thomas Bennett slowly placed his own receiver back in its cradle. He looked at the confused faces of his executive team, then down at his personal phone, which was now lit up like a Christmas tree with incoming calls from his panicked board. The multi-billion-dollar Airbus deal was forgotten. The neatly ordered world he had ruled for a decade had just been blown apart by a woman in a cashmere hoodie whom he and his company had dismissed as a nobody. The bill for Heather Morgan's prejudice had just arrived, and it was going to be astronomical. The fallout inside United Airlines was not a slow burn. It was a series of controlled demolitions, each one meticulously targeted to shake the company's leadership to its very foundation. Thomas Bennett, a man whose entire persona was built on the granite of unflappable control, found himself in a state of pure, unadulterated panic. His mind, usually a sharp instrument of corporate strategy, was now a maelstrom of fear and disbelief. The name Dr. Alexandria Rhodes echoed in his head, a phantom he had unknowingly provoked into a fury. An emergency virtual board meeting was convened with a speed that defied corporate bureaucracy. It took just under 2 hours. On the screens of a dozen laptops in a dozen lavish offices and homes across the country, the faces of the board members materialized. They were a gallery of the powerful and privileged. But today, their expressions were uniform, grim masks of anxiety. The atmosphere wasn't just tense, it was feral. Alexandria Rhodes's letter, delivered with the precision of a targeted missile, had done its job perfectly. The board wasn't merely concerned. They were terrified. They were staring into the abyss of a crisis that threatened not just the stock price, but the very integrity of their leadership. They were facing the righteous wrath of a major shareholder who had been personally and physically abused by their own company. Lawrence Gable, the board's lead independent director and a man whose presence usually calmed the most turbulent waters, was the first to speak. His voice, typically a low baritone of reason, was sharp with accusation. "How in the hell did this happen, Tom?" he demanded, his eyes boring into Bennett's image on the screen. "We're not talking about a lost bag or a delayed flight. We're talking about an assault on the CEO of Obsidian Capital. How did her complaint get buried in some customer care queue and end up with her being labeled the problem Bennett, for the first time in his long and storied tenure, had no plausible answer?" He felt the sweat bead on his brow. It was a procedural failure. He began the words tasting like ash in his mouth. A catastrophic breakdown in communication. The report from the flight crew was misleading. Misleading another board member, a sharp-witted tech CEO from Austin, scoffed loudly. "Tom, let's call it what it is. It was a fabrication, a self-serving lie concocted by the employee and her colleagues to cover up an assault. And our system, your system, accepted it without a single question. What does that say about our internal controls, about our culture?" The rhetorical question hung in the virtual room, heavy and damning. The answer was clear to everyone on the call. It said their culture was rotten. A place where the lowest-level employee felt empowered to abuse a customer, confident the institution would protect them. Bennett's instinct, honed by decades of corporate firefights, was to immediately shift to damage control. "I'll call her," he announced, trying to project a command he no longer felt. "I'll apologize personally profusely. We'll offer a substantial settlement, something in the 8-figure range. We'll make this go away quietly." A weary, bitter laugh came from Lawrence Gable. "Too late for that." "Tom," he sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to ward off a migraine. "Did you even read the letter?" It states, and I quote, "I am no longer interested in speaking with you or anyone on your team directly. Her counsel, Mr. Rivera, is the gatekeeper. They've shut you out, Tom. They are in complete control of this situation now." And they were. The next communication from Nathan Rivera arrived not as a phone call, but as an email sent directly to Thomas Bennett and carbon copied to every single member of the board. There was no friendly preamble, no room for negotiation. It was a list of non-negotiable demands, a corporate ultimatum. Bennett read the email, and the floor seemed to drop out from beneath him. Each demand was a hammer blow shattering another piece of his authority. The demands of Obsidian Capital Partners on behalf of Dr. Alexandria Rhodes. Immediate termination. The employment of flight attendant Heather Morgan is to be terminated immediately for cause, based on her physical assault of a passenger and her subsequent falsification of an official report. Executive accountability. Andrea Collins, the Senior Vice President of In-Flight Services, and William Parker, the General Counsel, are to be removed from their positions. Their leadership fostered the culture of negligence and deflection that allowed this incident to fester and escalate. Their failure was absolute. Public Apology CEO Thomas Bennett will issue a full unreserved public apology via a press release and a video statement posted on all official company channels. The apology will specifically mention the assault on Dr. Rhodes, name her as the victim with her permission which has been granted, and state unequivocally that the airline's initial response was a failure. It will not contain any corporate doublespeak about learning experiences or moving forward. It will be a raw, humiliating admission of fault. Organizational overhaul. The airline will contract at its own expense a diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI consultancy firm to be chosen solely by Dr. Rhodes. This firm will conduct a comprehensive top-to-bottom audit of the airline's hiring, training, and complaint resolution processes. The airline will be legally bound to implement all of the firm's primary recommendations within 18 months. The Phoenix Foundation. The airline will provide the initial seed funding of $50 million to establish the Phoenix Aviation and Travel Foundation. This independent foundation, to be managed by a board appointed by Dr. Rhodes, will provide grants and venture capital to support women and minority-owned businesses within the broader travel and hospitality industry. This was the masterstroke, the demand that elevated the entire affair from a personal grievance to a crusade. It was not a settlement paid to Alexandria. It was a penalty to be paid by the airline to fix the very culture of exclusion that allowed the incident to happen. The board stared at the list on their screens. A $50 million foundation, the firing of 2 senior VPs, a public groveling apology. It was unprecedented. But the alternative was unthinkable. A proxy war with their largest shareholder, a battle they would lose spectacularly and publicly, one that would gut the company's value and make them a case study in corporate malfeasance for decades to come. Thomas Bennett's career was hanging by a single thread, and that thread was held in the hand of Alexandria Rhodes. The vote was a formality. They unanimously and grimly agreed to accept all terms. The hard karma, swift and brutal, began its descent upon the unsuspecting. Heather Morgan was at home enjoying a few days off, basking in a glow of vindication. She had been debriefed by her union representative and an HR manager from the Chicago office. They had been wonderfully supportive. They listened earnestly as she painted her picture of the entitled, aggressive passenger. They assured her that the airline stood by its crew, especially veterans like her. The passenger's complaint, they said, was being filed away as unsubstantiated. Heather felt smug, powerful. She had put that arrogant woman in her place and had gotten away with it. She was on the phone with her friend, another long-haul flight attendant, recounting the story with relish. Honestly, Cheryl, you should have seen her sitting there in first class in some ratty old hoodie acting like she owned the plane. I finally had to put my foot down. Just as she was laughing, her doorbell rang. It was a courier holding a slim, crisp envelope. Corporate letterhead. She signed for it, still chatting on the phone. "Hold on, Cheryl. It's a letter from HQ. Probably just a formal notice that the case is closed and I'm officially cleared," she said with a chuckle. She slit the envelope open with her thumb. Her triumphant expression dissolved as she read the first line. Confusion clouded her face, followed by a tidal wave of disbelief and cold, gut-wrenching horror. "Your employment with United Airlines is terminated effective immediately," the letter began. "This decision is based on a full and final review of the incident on flight UA482, which found credible and corroborated evidence of your unprovoked physical assault on a passenger in gross violation of company policy, federal aviation regulations, and basic standards of professional conduct." The phone slipped from her numb fingers and clattered to the floor. Her friend's voice. Heather, are you?" There was a tiny distant sound. She couldn't breathe. She read the rest of the letter in a daze. Security had already deactivated her employee ID badge. Her access to the company network was revoked. Her final paycheck would be mailed. She was to have no further contact with any active airline employees. 22 years of service, her seniority, her pension, her flight benefits, her identity, all gone. Evaporated in the time it took to read a single paragraph. For a brief moment, as the reality of what was happening crashed over her, Heather felt a flicker of genuine regret, not just for the consequences she now faced, but for the action itself. The memory of her hand striking Alexandria's played in her mind, and for the first time, she saw it clearly not as a justified defense of airline property, but as what it truly was, a moment of pure, ugly prejudice. But the feeling passed quickly, replaced by defensive anger. This wasn't fair. It wasn't right. That woman had provoked her. She had been difficult. She had been... But the excuses rang hollow even in her own mind. In a panic, she snatched the phone back up. "Cheryl, they fired me! They fired me!" she shrieked before hanging up and frantically dialing her union rep. The supportive, friendly man she'd spoken to just days before was now a wall of ice. "Heather, I'm sorry," he said, his voice stripped of all warmth. "The company invoked a morals and conduct clause. There were witnesses, Heather. Multiple credible passenger witnesses. The decision came from the very, very top, from the board. Our hands are tied. There is nothing we can do." But she was... Stop, the rep cut her off sharply. "I've seen the witness statements, Heather. I've seen the captain's report. What you did was indefensible, and what you claimed happened afterward was a fabrication. The union cannot and will not defend this." Her world had imploded, but she didn't know that this was only the beginning of her freefall. The next day, the story exploded. Thomas Bennett, looking like a man who had aged a decade overnight, appeared in a high-production video posted on all the airline's social media channels. He read the apology from a teleprompter, but the humiliation in his eyes was real. He detailed the unacceptable physical assault by a flight attendant against a deeply valued customer and partner, Dr. Alexandria Rhodes. He announced the immediate resignations of the 2 senior executives and the stunning creation of the $50 million foundation. It was a bombshell. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, CNN, Forbes. Every major news outlet pounced on it. The narrative was irresistible. Race class, corporate power, and karmic justice all rolled into one. Heather Morgan's name was not mentioned in the official release, but in the Shark Tank of modern media it was leaked within hours. Her photo, culled from her own public social media profile, was splashed across news sites and television screens. She was no longer just an unemployed flight attendant. She was a public villain, a meme, a symbol. Airline Karen trended for 48 hours. She was harassed online with a viciousness that terrified her. Her address was posted on fringe websites. Reporters camped outside her suburban home. Friends she'd had for decades stopped answering her calls. Neighbors would turn and walk the other way when they saw her. Heather sat alone in her living room, curtains drawn, trying to make sense of the catastrophic turn her life had taken. On her coffee table lay a pile of bills, the mortgage she could no longer afford, credit card statements, utilities. The reality of her financial precarity crashed over her in waves. She thought about the woman in the hoodie, the woman she had dismissed as unimportant. She thought about how quickly she had judged her, how easily she had justified her own aggression. In her darkest moments, when self-pity gave way to painful clarity, Heather recognized that her downfall hadn't been engineered by Alexandria's wealth or power. It had been triggered by her own actions, her own prejudices, her own certainty that the woman in the cashmere hoodie was someone she could dismiss and disrespect with impunity. She tried to find another job, any job in the service industry, but her name and face were now toxic. No one would hire the flight attendant who slapped the billionaire. Her prejudice, her flash of anger born from 1,000 tiny resentments, had cost her everything. It wasn't just the slap. It was the arrogance. It was the certainty that she was right, that her victim was a nobody, and that the system would always protect her. She had built her life on a foundation of quiet biases, and the person she chose to target happened to be the one person on Earth capable of pulling that foundation out from under her. It wasn't a twist of fate. It was a collision with consequence. The hard karma had hit, and it had hit with the force of a plane crash. Meanwhile, at the United Airlines headquarters, the aftershocks continued. The emergency board meeting had turned from crisis management to outright damage control. The stock had plummeted 8% in a single day as investors reacted to the news of the assault and the forced removal of key executives. Lawrence Gable was leading the meeting, now Bennett having been sidelined to a purely ceremonial role until the situation stabilized. The Phoenix Foundation announcement has generated some positive press. A PR executive was saying, her voice strained with the effort to find any silver lining. Social media sentiment is showing early signs of improvement. And the legal exposure, Gable asked, turning to the interim general counsel, a woman who had been hastily promoted from the deputy position. Contained for now, she replied. Dr. Rhodes is not pursuing personal damages, which is unexpected. The foundation structure effectively channels what would have been a massive personal settlement into a public good. It's actually quite brilliant from a PR perspective. And operationally, the interim head of in-flight services cleared her throat. We've initiated a complete review of all passenger complaint procedures. The DEI consultancy firm Horizon Equity Partners will begin their audit next week. They've already requested access to our training materials and complaint records for the past 5 years. Gable nodded grimly. And Bennett, how's he holding up? A strained silence fell over the virtual meeting. Everyone knew that Thomas Bennett's days as CEO were numbered. The only question was whether he would resign gracefully or be forced out in a proxy vote led by Obsidian Capital. He's compliant, the PR executive finally said. He's following the script provided by Obsidian's team to the letter. Gable leaned back in his chair, the weight of the situation evident in the new lines on his face. Let me be very clear, he said, his voice low but carrying the force of absolute authority. From this moment forward, every interaction with Dr. Rhodes and her team is to be handled with the utmost professionalism and deference. If she asks for the moon, you find a way to deliver it. If Obsidian makes a suggestion, we treat it as a directive. Is that understood? The faces on the screen nodded in unison. Good. Because make no mistake, our jobs this airline, our entire future is now in the hands of a woman our employee physically struck, and our company then proceeded to insult and dismiss. The only path forward is complete and total contrition. Unknown to the board, one of their members, a quiet older gentleman named Richard Harmon, who rarely spoke during meetings, had been doing his own research into Alexandria Rhodes and Obsidian Capital. What he found both impressed and disturbed him. Obsidian's past interventions in corporate governance weren't random. They followed a pattern. The firm targeted companies with structural issues, particularly those related to employee conduct and corporate culture. In each case, the intervention had been precipitated by a personal incident, as if Alexandria Rhodes needed to witness the problem firsthand before acting. And in each case, the result hadn't just been a change in leadership or policy. It had been a complete transformation of the target company's culture. After the board meeting ended, Harmon placed a private call to Gable. "Lawrence, we need to understand something. This isn't just about appeasing an angry shareholder. Rhodes isn't after Bennett's head or a quick PR fix. She's after a complete rebuild of our corporate DNA. And based on her track record, she'll get it. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we get ahead of this. Stop thinking defensively and start thinking transformationally. If we're going to survive this, we need to become the change she's demanding before she forces it on us." Gable was quiet for a moment. "You think we should accelerate the reforms? Go beyond her demands?" "Exactly. It's the only way to regain any agency in this situation." The seeds of real change were being planted not just from external pressure, but from within. Alexandria's strategy was working at a level even she might not have anticipated. In her office, high above New York City, Alexandria Rhodes watched the corporate apology video without expression. Beside her, Nathan Rivera studied her face, looking for any reaction. "Is it satisfactory?" he asked when the video ended. Alexandria was silent for a long moment, her fingertips pressed together beneath her chin. "It will do," she said finally. "Bennett's finished, of course. But that's not my concern. What matters is the foundation and the organizational audit. Those are the mechanisms that will create lasting change." "You never intended to take personal compensation," Nathan observed. It wasn't a question. "What would be the point?" Alexandria asked, turning to face him. "Another zero in my bank account. No, Nathan, this was never about money. It was about accountability, yes, but more importantly, it was about transformation. One airline changes its practices, others follow, standards shift, cultures evolve." She looked out at the city skyline, her expression thoughtful. "My father used to say that money is just energy. It flows where you direct it. I'd rather direct it toward changing a broken system than toward personal comfort." Nathan nodded understanding as always. In the 15 years they'd worked together, he'd seen Alexandria turn corporate reckonings into instruments of social change time and again. "The Phoenix Foundation board appointments," he prompted. "I want diversity of thought and experience," Alexandria replied. "Industry veterans." "Yes, but also academics, civil rights attorneys, former flight attendants who've experienced discrimination themselves. No one from Obsidian, though. This needs to be independent with its own identity and mission." She paused, then added with a faint smile, "And I want James Winters." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "The tech entrepreneur from 2B. Why him?" "Because he spoke up." Alexandria said simply, "When it would have been easier to stay silent, he chose to bear witness. That's the kind of courage the Foundation needs to cultivate." "And Heather Morgan." Alexandria's expression hardened slightly. "She made her choices. Now she lives with the consequences. I have no interest in her future one way or another." Her tone softened slightly. "Though I understand she's struggling to find employment. Perhaps that's something the Foundation might eventually address rehabilitation programs for airline personnel who've been terminated for conduct violations. Everyone deserves a path to redemption provided they're willing to walk it." Nathan recognized the complexity in her response. Alexandria was not vindictive by nature, but neither was she sentimental. Heather Morgan had ceased to exist in her world the moment justice had been served. Yet even in that dismissal, there was a seed of potential future reform. "We've been approached by several news outlets," Nathan said, changing the subject. 60 Minutes, CNN, Bloomberg. They all want interviews." Alexandria shook her head. decline them all. This isn't about my personal story or Obsidian's power. It's about a principle that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of how they're dressed or what they look like. The foundation will be the story, not me." As Nathan left her office, Alexandria turned back to the window. In the reflection of the glass, she could see herself, the same simple outfit, the same quiet composure that had made Heather Morgan dismiss her as insignificant. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her greatest power had always been that people underestimated her. It was a weapon she wielded with precision, never with cruelty, but always with purpose. And now that weapon had reshaped an entire corporation. The video of Thomas Bennett's apology spread across the internet like wildfire, accumulating millions of views within hours. Media analysts dissected every word, every micro-expression, noting the clear discomfort and humiliation on the CEO's face. "This is unprecedented," a CNBC commentator said, her tone betraying her amazement. "We're not seeing the usual corporate doublespeak about regrettable incidents or learning opportunities. This is a full admission of fault, naming the victim, acknowledging the cover-up attempt. I've never seen anything like it." Social media erupted with reactions. Some praised the transparency, calling it a new standard for corporate accountability. Others saw it as a carefully orchestrated PR move, designed to mitigate further damage. What few knew was how directly Alexandria Rhodes had crafted the apology. Every word had been vetted by Nathan Rivera with specific instructions: no euphemisms, no deflections, no attempts to minimize the seriousness of what had occurred. The press release accompanying the video provided more details about the Phoenix Foundation, announcing that its mission would be to foster diversity, equity, and inclusion within the travel and hospitality industry through grants, mentorship programs, and venture capital investments. Industry insiders noted the strategic brilliance of the move. Instead of a private settlement that would have disappeared into Alexandria's considerable fortune, the foundation created a lasting legacy, one that would continually remind United Airlines and the entire industry of their obligations to treat all passengers with dignity. The day after the apology was released, United's stock stabilized, then began a slow climb back up. The market had spoken transparency, accountability, and concrete action were valued. The $50 million foundation seemed a small price to pay for corporate redemption. In Chicago, Thomas Bennett sat alone in his office, staring at the wall of screens displaying the media coverage. He had been effectively neutered as CEO, his authority stripped, his decisions now subject to board approval for even the most minor matters. It was just a matter of time before he was officially replaced. As he watched his own face on the screens, apologizing for failures that just a week ago he would have dismissed as trivial, Bennett felt a strange mix of humiliation and relief. The humiliation was obvious. His career was effectively over. But the relief, that was unexpected. For the first time in decades, he wasn't responsible for maintaining the fiction that everything was fine, that the company culture was healthy, that passenger complaints were just the cost of doing business. There was a strange freedom in the collapse of that facade. His phone buzzed a text from Richard Harmon, the quiet board member. This could be the beginning of something better, not just for the airline, but for the industry. Your legacy doesn't have to be this failure. It could be what comes next. Bennett stared at the message for a long time. Then, slowly, he began to type a response. Within the airline, the transformations were swift and far-reaching. Andrea Collins and William Parker had been escorted from the building the same day the board accepted Obsidian's demands. Their offices were emptied, their company emails deactivated, their corporate access cards rendered useless. The interim replacements were carefully selected, not the next people in line, but individuals who had previously raised concerns about the company's handling of passenger complaints, especially those from minority passengers. The new head of in-flight services, Janet Ramirez, had a background in both aviation and organizational psychology. Her first official act was to freeze all current training materials pending review by Horizon Equity Partners, the DEI consultancy chosen by Alexandria. "We're not just putting a Band-Aid on this," she announced in her first all-hands meeting with the Flight Attendant Corps. "We are rebuilding our approach to passenger interactions from the ground up." And yes, that means acknowledging uncomfortable truths about bias, both conscious and unconscious, in our current practices. The audit began immediately. A team of consultants from Horizon Equity embedded themselves in the airline's operations, reviewing training materials, complaint records, hiring practices, and promotion patterns. Their preliminary findings were sobering. Passengers of color were significantly more likely to have their complaints dismissed or downgraded in severity. Flight attendants from minority backgrounds reported consistent microaggressions from both passengers and colleagues. The complaint resolution system was found to be heavily weighted toward protecting employees rather than addressing legitimate passenger concerns. The revelation that hit hardest was the discovery that Heather Morgan had been the subject of 3 previous complaints from passengers of color, all of which had been dismissed without investigation. This pattern of negligence was precisely what Alexandria had suspected, and why she had insisted on a comprehensive audit rather than treating the incident as isolated. In the corporate offices, the atmosphere shifted from resistance to adaptation. Those who had initially viewed the changes as punitive began to see them as necessary evolutionary steps. Richard Harmon, once the quiet board member, emerged as a vocal advocate for reform, working with David the flight attendant, who had handled Alexandria with respect and professionalism, to implement changes that went beyond Obsidian's demands. David the flight attendant, who had handled Alexandria with respect and professionalism, was promoted to a new position, Director of Passenger Dignity, a role specifically created to ensure that passenger complaints were handled with sensitivity and thoroughness. The recommendations from Horizon Equity were extensive and unapologetically ambitious mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, a complete overhaul of the complaint resolution process with independent review, diverse hiring targets at all levels of the organization, the creation of a passenger advocacy office with direct reporting to the board. In normal times, such sweeping changes would have met with institutional resistance. But these were not normal times. With Obsidian Capital watching closely and the terms of Alexandria's demands legally binding, the airline had no choice but to implement every recommendation. Change rippled through the organization. Some employees resigned, unwilling to adapt to the new expectations. Others embraced the transformation, sensing that it represented not just a corporate necessity, but a moral imperative. The Flight Attendants Union, initially defensive about Heather Morgan's termination, shifted its stance after reviewing the evidence and the audit findings. Their new leadership issued a statement affirming their commitment to the highest standards of professionalism and respect for all passengers, regardless of appearance, race, or background. Behind the scenes, Thomas Bennett was negotiating the terms of his departure. The board, recognizing the inevitability of his exit, was focused on finding a successor who would maintain the momentum of change while restoring confidence in the airline's leadership. What surprised Bennett most was his own evolving perspective. As the audit findings were presented to him, he found himself genuinely troubled by what they revealed. Had he truly been blind to these patterns, or had he simply chosen not to see them? The question haunted him, and in his final weeks as CEO, he became an unexpected ally to the reform efforts, lending his support to changes that would have seemed unthinkable to him just months earlier. 6 months after the incident on Flight UA482, the Phoenix Foundation officially launched. The Foundation's headquarters occupied a light-filled space in downtown Chicago, just blocks from United's corporate offices, a proximity that was no coincidence. Every executive who looked out their window would be reminded of the consequences of their previous failures. Alexandria had declined to chair the Foundation's board personally, instead assembling a diverse group of industry veterans, civil rights advocates, and academics. Dr. James Winters. The tech entrepreneur from Seat 2B who had witnessed the assault was among them, having reached out to Alexandria after the incident to express his desire to be part of the solution. "When I saw what happened that day," he said during the Foundation's opening ceremony, "I realized that bearing witness isn't enough. We have to transform that witness into action." The Foundation's first initiative was a scholarship program for minority students pursuing careers in aviation, from pilots to mechanics to management. The second was a venture capital fund specifically for women and minority entrepreneurs developing innovations in travel technology and services. Most significantly, the Foundation established an industry-wide certification program for diversity and inclusion practices. Airlines, hotels, cruise lines, and other travel businesses could apply for certification, which required meeting stringent standards for employee training, complaint handling, and inclusive hiring. The certification quickly became a competitive advantage in the marketplace, with travelers actively choosing certified companies for their business. Alexandria attended the Foundation's launch event but declined to give a speech. Instead, she watched from the back of the room as the board chair, a former FAA administrator who had long advocated for equity in aviation, outlined their mission. What happened to Dr. Rhodes was not an isolated incident, the chair said, her voice carrying across the hushed audience. It was a symptom of a deeper problem, one that affects countless travelers who don't have the resources or platform to demand accountability. The Phoenix Foundation exists to give voice to those experiences and to transform the industry from within. As she listened, Alexandria felt a sense of completion. The humiliation of that slap, the dismissal in Heather's eyes, the corporate stonewalling, all had been transmuted into something with purpose and power. It wasn't revenge, and it was reformation. Among the Foundation's early initiatives was a program Alexandria had quietly insisted on, a rehabilitation pathway for airline personnel who had been terminated for conduct violations. The program provided counseling, retraining, and eventually placement assistance for those willing to acknowledge their past failures and commit to growth. Heather Morgan was sent an invitation to be the program's first participant. Whether she would accept remained to be seen, but the door to redemption had been opened not out of sentimentality, but out of Alexandria's belief that true change required both accountability and opportunity. While the Foundation flourished, Heather Morgan's life continued to unravel. Unable to find work in the airline industry or any customer service role, she was forced to sell her home and move to a smaller apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. Her savings, once substantial, dwindled rapidly without income to replenish them. Former colleagues who had initially sympathized with her began to distance themselves as the full story emerged. The revelation that she had previous complaints against her that had been buried was particularly damaging, transforming her in their eyes from an unfortunate scapegoat to a genuine liability. Her union, which had initially promised to fight for her, quietly dropped their efforts after reviewing the passenger witness statements and the video evidence that had surfaced after the incident. In a moment of desperate anger, Heather attempted to tell her side of the story to a local news outlet. The interview backfired spectacularly when she described Alexandria as entitled and aggressive terms that rang hollow against the composed professional image the public had formed of the finance executive. Social media erupted again, with clips of the interview going viral for all the wrong reasons. Commentators noted the irony of Heather calling someone else entitled when she had felt empowered to physically strike a passenger who had merely asked for help. 6 months after her termination, Heather was forced to move in with her sister in another state, her reputation in tatters, her career prospects non-existent. Late one evening, as she scrolled through job listings that seemed to lead nowhere, an email arrived. The Phoenix Foundation. She nearly deleted it, assuming it was some kind of cruel joke. But curiosity won out. She opened it to find an invitation to participate in a rehabilitation program for airline personnel seeking to rebuild their careers after disciplinary action. The email was clinical, neither accusatory nor sympathetic. It simply offered a path forward, counseling bias training, eventual placement assistance for those who completed the program successfully. Heather stared at the screen for a long time. Her first instinct was rage. How dare they offer her charity after destroying her life? But as the anger subsided, a different emotion took its place: exhaustion. She was tired of the anger, tired of the blame, tired of the endless cycle of justification and denial. For the first time since the incident, she allowed herself to replay the moment honestly. She saw her hand striking Alexandria's. She felt the rush of power it had given her. She acknowledged the ugly truth that she had enjoyed putting this woman in her place. The realization was like ice water down her spine. What kind of person had she become? With trembling fingers, she hit reply and typed 2 words. "I'm interested." She had become a case study in the consequences of unchecked bias, a cautionary tale told in corporate training sessions across the country. But perhaps, just perhaps, she could also become something else, an example of genuine transformation. What Heather never fully grasped, even in the aftermath, was that her downfall hadn't been engineered by Alexandria's wealth or power. It had been triggered by her own actions, her own prejudices, her own certainty that the woman in the cashmere hoodie was someone she could dismiss and disrespect with impunity. In the quiet moments before sleep on her sister's fold-out couch, Heather sometimes replayed that moment in the airplane cabin. The frustration, the snap judgment, the impulse that had led her to slap a passenger's hand. The truth, which she was only now beginning to acknowledge to herself, was simpler and more profound. Every passenger deserved the same respect, the same dignity, the same service, regardless of who they were or what power they held. That was the lesson she had failed to learn, the principle she had violated, and the reason her world had collapsed. And now, perhaps it was the foundation on which she might begin to rebuild. 1 year after the incident on Flight UA 482, the ripple effects had spread far beyond United Airlines. The Phoenix Foundation had become a powerful force in the travel industry, its certification now a coveted mark of excellence that companies fought to earn. Passengers actively sought out certified airlines, hotels, and travel services, making diversity and inclusion practices a genuine competitive advantage. Other major carriers, watching United's transformation with wary eyes, had proactively launched their own internal audits and training overhauls. No one wanted to be the next company caught flat-footed by a discrimination incident gone viral. The Federal Aviation Administration and Department of Transportation had taken notice as well, launching a joint task force to examine industry-wide standards for passenger complaint handling, with a special focus on potential bias in how complaints from minority passengers were processed. A congressional hearing on discrimination in commercial aviation featured testimony from travelers who had experienced similar treatment to Alexandria, but lacked her resources to demand accountability. Their stories, once dismissed or ignored, now commanded attention from lawmakers and regulators. The Phoenix Foundation's scholarship program had already supported over 100 students from underrepresented backgrounds pursuing careers in aviation, creating a pipeline of diverse talent that would shape the industry for generations to come. Its venture capital arm had funded 15 startups led by women and minority entrepreneurs, including an innovative app that allowed passengers to report discrimination incidents in real time with direct routing to company executives and regulatory agencies. United Airlines, once the poster child for corporate negligence, had transformed itself into an industry leader in inclusive practices. The organizational audit had been painful but thorough, leading to changes at every level of the company. Thomas Bennett had departed 6 months after the incident, taking early retirement, with a significantly reduced severance package, a condition Alexandria had personally insisted upon. His replacement, a veteran aviation executive with a strong record in organizational culture, had embraced the transformation, making it a cornerstone of the airline's new identity. Most importantly, the cultural shift within the company had begun to take hold. Flight attendants reported feeling empowered to address bias from colleagues or passengers without fear of retaliation. Diverse hiring and promotion had increased at all levels of the organization. Passenger complaints were handled with new seriousness and transparency. None of this would have happened without that single moment when Heather Morgan's hand struck Alexandria's. The Phoenix Foundation's rehabilitation program had expanded beyond its initial scope. Heather Morgan, to everyone's surprise, had not only completed the program, but had become one of its most vocal advocates. She now spoke regularly at industry conferences, sharing her story not as a victim of corporate overreaction, but as someone who had been given the opportunity to confront her own biases and grow beyond them. "I thought I was protecting airline property," she would say in her presentations. "What I was really doing was protecting my own power, my own privilege, my own right to decide who belonged and who didn't. That's not service. That's not professionalism. That's prejudice, plain and simple." Her candor was uncomfortable for many, but effective precisely because of that discomfort. She had become, ironically, one of the Foundation's most powerful agents of change. On the one-year anniversary of the incident, Alexandria found herself once again on a United Airlines flight from San Francisco to New York. She had specifically requested the same route UA 482, though she had booked seat 3A this time, avoiding the emotional echo of the exact location. As she settled into her seat, she noted the subtle differences in the first-class cabin experience. The flight attendants were more attentive, more genuine in their interactions with all passengers. The pre-flight announcements included a brief statement about the airline's commitment to respectful treatment of every traveler. Small changes, perhaps, but indicative of a deeper transformation. The lead flight attendant, a woman named Teresa, recognized Alexandria immediately, despite her casual attire the same style of hoodie and jeans she had worn a year ago. There was no judgment in Teresa's eyes, only professional courtesy and perhaps a touch of nervousness. "Dr. Rhodes," she said quietly, "it's an honor to have you on our flight. Is there anything special you require?" Alexandria smiled gently. "Just the same service you'd give any other passenger, Teresa. That's all I've ever wanted." Teresa nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind the simple request. As the flight took off, Alexandria gazed out the window, reflecting on the year that had passed. She had never intended to become a catalyst for industry-wide change. She had simply wanted accountability for a moment of injustice. Yet the ripples had spread far beyond that initial stone thrown into the water. The Phoenix Foundation was doing work that would outlast her, creating opportunities and safeguards for travelers who would never know her name. There was a certain poetic justice in it all. The very bias that had led Heather Morgan to dismiss her based on her appearance had ultimately empowered Alexandria to create systemic change. It wasn't about revenge. It had never been about that. It was about transformation, about using power responsibly to reshape an environment that allowed prejudice to flourish. Alexandria opened her laptop, smiling faintly as she plugged it into the power outlet without any difficulty. She had an email from Nathan about the Phoenix Foundation's latest initiative, a partnership with major airlines to create standardized bias response training for all flight crews. United had been the first to sign on, eager to demonstrate their continued commitment to change. Others were following suit, not wanting to be left behind. This was the true victory, not Heather's downfall or Bennett's humiliation, but the gradual, inexorable shift in what was acceptable, what was expected, what was demanded. As the flight approached New York, Teresa returned to Alexandria's row. "Dr. Rhodes," she said, her voice low enough that other passengers couldn't hear. "I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I wanted to thank you. I was considering leaving the industry before everything changed. The environment was becoming toxic, especially for flight attendants of color like myself. But now," she gestured subtly around the cabin, "now I feel like I can actually do my job with dignity. The new training, the new protocols, it's like night and day. And the Foundation's mentorship program. I've been paired with a senior executive who's helping me prepare for management roles." Alexandria felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. This was the true measure of what had been accomplished, not corporate policies or press releases, but real changes in individual lives. I'm glad to hear that, Teresa. That's exactly what we hoped for. Teresa hesitated, then added, There's someone else who wanted to meet you if you don't mind. Our newest flight attendant, Maria. She's one of the first Phoenix Foundation scholarship recipients to complete training. At Alexandria's nod, Teresa gestured toward the galley. A young woman approached, her uniform crisp, her posture confident, but her eyes wide with admiration. Dr. Rhodes. It's an honor, Maria said, extending her hand. Without your foundation, I would never have been able to afford flight school. I'm the first in my family to finish college, and now, this. You changed everything. Alexandria shook her hand warmly. You earned it, Maria. The foundation just opened the door. You walked through it on your own merit. As the two flight attendants returned to their duties, Alexandria turned back to the window. Below her, the Manhattan skyline emerged through wisps of cloud, a testament to human ambition and perseverance. One slap, one moment of prejudice, and from it an entire movement had grown. She thought of Heather Morgan, briefly wondering if the woman had learned anything from her downfall. The news of Heather's participation in the rehabilitation program had surprised Alexandria. She had never expected the flight attendant to take that path to confront her own biases so openly. It was, in its way, a different kind of courage. As the plane touched down at JFK, Alexandria felt a sense of closure that had eluded her until now. The circle was complete. The wound had healed, and in its place stood something stronger, something that would outlast both her and Heather Morgan. She had not raised her voice. She had not sought revenge. She had simply stood firm in her dignity and used her power to ensure others could do the same. As passengers began to deplane, Teresa caught her eye one last time and gave her a subtle nod of respect, not because of her wealth or position, but because of what she had chosen to do with them. And in that moment, Alexandria knew that the journey that had begun with a slap had ended with something far more powerful: transformation. The Phoenix Foundation would continue its work long after this anniversary had passed, opening doors, changing lives, reshaping an industry from within. What had been meant to diminish her had instead created a legacy of dignity that would touch countless lives for generations to come. Justice Alexandria reflected as she walked through the terminal wasn't just about punishment. It was about creation, about building something better from the ashes of what had been destroyed. And that was a victory more profound than any revenge could ever be. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that true power isn't about putting others down, it's about lifting everyone up. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful stories of justice and transformation to light. Remember, change begins with a single moment of courage, whether it's speaking up when you witness injustice or standing firm in your own dignity. Thank you for watching.